I never thought that a birthday cake, something so sweet, so innocent, would end up being the poison that finally cracked my world wide open. It had been my 72nd birthday. The day started with polite hugs and that special cake my daughter-in-law, Emma, insisted on baking herself, a shocking gesture from a woman so cold she wouldn't have baked a single cookie for her own mother. She'd never so much as whisked an egg for anyone, least of all for me. So why now? Why this sudden performance of sweetness? I sensed something wrong immediately, the way a dog hears thunder before it rolls across the sky. I should have trusted that instinct right then, before the frosting was cut and the poison spread wide open across my kitchen table. So when she came the next day and saw me in a good mood, no less, she was shocked beyond words. The only words she was able to produce were, "Did you eat the cake?" I had just told her. "Oh, I gave your special cake to your mother instead," I said sweetly, as if I were merely mentioning that I'd watered her plants or fed her cat just to see her reaction. And then I saw it. The teacup in her hand trembled before it shattered onto the tiled floor, pieces bouncing and scattering like tiny screaming witnesses. I didn't flinch. I didn't even breathe. Because in that moment, I wasn't her mother-in-law or a frail old woman she could dismiss with a tight smile. I was the mirror she'd been terrified to look into. I saw it, the flicker of pure terror in her eyes, sharp and real, like a needle sliding under the skin. And in that split second, I understood everything. The sudden morning visits, the careful, watchful eyes at dinner, the special cake she insisted on baking herself. I thought it was odd then. I thought she was just trying to outshine the store-bought cakes I'd always preferred. But that was the moment it all changed. The moment the fog lifted and the stories I told myself about family, about loyalty, about love, evaporated like steam from a kettle left too long on the stove. I saw Emma for who she really was. Not just manipulative, but dangerous. The kind of dangerous that wore polite dresses and forced sweet smiles in family photos. The kind that asked if I needed help with my pills, always at just the right time. I stared at her, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it was echoing off the walls. I waited for her to say something, to defend herself, to twist her lips into that practiced pity face. But she didn't. She just stood there, pale and shaking, her hands hovering in the air as if she could catch the pieces of her plan before they hit the ground. And in that stillness, I realized this wasn't just a cake. It was the beginning of a war. Just yesterday, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. It was my 72nd birthday, and the house was alive with laughter and voices that drifted in and out of the kitchen like warm summer air. Balloons in pale blues and pinks danced gently above the fireplace, and the dining table was covered in cards. Each one scribbled with, "We love you, Grandma," or "Best mother-in-law ever," lies disguised in glittery ink. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one Cliff used to call my throne, watching my son hang a garland lopsidedly while my grandchildren chased each other in the hallway. Emma moved around with that graceful efficiency she wore like a second skin. She refilled glasses, offered hors d'oeuvres, and posed for photos she would later use to remind everyone what a perfect family she had built. That day, I felt surrounded by warmth, wrapped up in a lie so thick I almost mistook it for love. Emma insisted on baking my birthday cake herself this year. She said it so sweetly, like it was a small gift she wanted to give me, her voice dripping with pride. "Store-bought cakes are so dry. Mom, let me make you something special, something full of love." I laughed it off at first. I always ordered my cakes from that little French bakery downtown, the one with the pastel boxes and careful ribbon ties. But Emma kept pushing. She showed me recipe printouts, new frosting techniques, and photos of elaborate cakes she claimed she could easily recreate. I tried to protest, but she tilted her head and touched my arm in that gentle, insistent way. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I said yes. When she brought it in, candles flickering and icing shimmering under the dining room lights, everyone clapped and cheered. I smiled for the photos, letting the grandchildren fight over who got the corner pieces with extra frosting. But inside, something twisted. As I leaned over to blow out the candles, I felt her eyes drilling into me, sharp and unblinking. She didn't look at the grandchildren screaming around the table. She didn't glance at my son pouring champagne or the balloons bobbing above our heads. No, her eyes stayed locked on me. I felt a shiver then, like a cold draft crawling across my neck. I shook it off, told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just the weight of age creeping into my bones again. Later, as I sliced pieces for the kids, I caught her watching me from the kitchen doorway. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She jumped when I offered her a slice, stammering that she'd already eaten too much batter and would pass. I didn't think much of it then, just tucked it away in that mental drawer labeled odd behavior, the one I never opened fully because it was easier not to. That night, as I lay in bed, replaying the day, her eyes kept returning to me. The way she watched me chew, as if she was waiting for something. I didn't know yet that she wasn't just watching. She was counting down. I sat on the edge of my bed after Emma fled the house, my hands shaking so badly I could hardly keep them folded in my lap. Her question echoed in my mind over and over, like a bird flinging itself against a window. Did you eat the cake? That wasn't a question of care. It was a question of consequence. My breath rattled in my throat as I stared at the floral wallpaper Cliff and I had put up years ago. Back then, I thought the right colors could make a home feel safe and warm. I thought love and patience could keep a family together, like glue holding together old porcelain. I thought about every strange moment from the past few months. Emma insisting she be the one to refill my pillbox each week, her sudden interest in my diet, always encouraging me to try something new or trust her recipes. How she offered to handle my prescriptions after my last doctor's visit, claiming the pharmacy lines were too long for me. I thought I was being cared for. God help me. I thought she was protecting me. As my mind twisted around these memories, I felt a new kind of ache blossom inside me, deeper than the arthritis in my knees or the brittle spot in my hip. It was the ache of betrayal settling into my bones. I pressed my hands to my face and felt tears slip down my cheeks. Not loud, heaving sobs. No, these were silent, steady, as though my body had already accepted what my mind was still clawing to deny. I replayed her face at the door, her trembling hands, her wide eyes. That wasn't shock at a ruined dessert. It was fear that her plan had slipped beyond her control. I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracking, "How long have you been waiting for me to vanish?" But even as the grief washed over me, I felt a tiny ember flicker beneath it. A spark I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Real, pulsing hot anger. Because I realized in that moment, as I sat alone in my bedroom, that Emma might have been counting on my silence, my blind trust. But she had underestimated one thing. I was still here. I was still watching. And I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in my bed with the lamp on, my old quilt pulled tight around my shoulders. The house creaked around me, each sound suddenly sharper, like the walls themselves were whispering secrets I'd missed all these years. Emma's face kept flashing behind my eyes, that wild, pale look when I told her I gave the cake away. I could almost hear her breath hitching, her voice breaking. I replayed every detail until it felt like a needle scraping across my bones. At some point, my grief curdled into something else, something steadier, colder. At dawn, before the sun had fully slipped over the horizon, I picked up the phone and called Martha. Martha had been my friend since we both wore beehive hairstyles and danced to Elvis on the radio. She was a nurse back then, sharp, unyielding, and fiercely loyal. The kind of woman who carried her stethoscope like a sword. When she answered, her voice was rough from sleep. "Margaret, what's happened?" I didn't waste time. I told her everything. The cake, Emma's panic, the strange behavior with my pills. My voice trembled at first, but the words spilled out, each confession burning hotter than the last. There was a long silence when I finished. I could hear her breathing deep and controlled, the way she always did before giving bad news to a patient. "Get me a piece of that cake," she said finally, her voice steely. "I'm coming over." Within an hour, Martha was standing in my kitchen, still wearing her floral housecoat and her hair pinned up messily. She didn't hug me or shush me. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. Instead, she pulled on gloves she'd fished out of her purse. She always carried a pair just in case, she claimed, and carefully scooped a slice of cake into a Ziploc bag. "I know someone who still works at the old lab," she said, eyes darting toward the doorway as if Emma might burst in at any moment. "I'll have them run tests quietly. No questions, no record under your name." I nodded, feeling the weight in my chest loosen, just a hair. After she packed up the sample, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "This isn't just about cake, Margaret. This is about control. She's been setting you up little by little. We need to be 2 steps ahead." I sat back down at the kitchen table as she left, my tea now cold beside me. The morning sun pushed across the floor, touching my feet. I felt exposed, raw, but not alone anymore. For the first time, I had an ally, someone who wasn't afraid to look at the ugliest parts of the truth with me. And in that moment, as Martha's car disappeared down my driveway, I realized the fight had begun. And I wasn't fighting it alone. That Sunday, I pulled on my nicest cardigan, the lavender one with tiny pearl buttons, and went to church. The morning air felt heavier than usual, thick with secrets I could almost taste on my tongue. I walked slower than I had in years, each step echoing in my head like a warning. Don't trust so easily. Don't forgive so quickly. When I arrived at the church garden, I saw Susan tending to the roses. Susan had always been the kind of friend who listened first and judged later. We met in Bible study years ago, back when I still thought a good woman meant a quiet woman. She looked up as I approached, her hands dirt-stained, hair pinned back with a pencil. "Margaret, you look pale. Come sit," she said, patting the wooden bench beside her. I sat down, my knees creaking, and she waited. I love that about Susan. She never demanded words. She just made space for them. The words tumbled out in ragged whispers. "The cake." Emma's watchful eyes. Martha taking the sample to be tested. I felt my throat tighten with each confession, my hands curling into fists on my lap. When I finished, Susan didn't gasp or cross herself dramatically. She just looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had seen more storms than sunshine. "You can't confront her yet," she finally said, voice low. "Not until you have proof. Proof strong enough to tear down her lies and protect herself." "But my son," I started. She squeezed my wrist firmly. "Your son will believe what she feeds him if you don't have something solid. You know this. You've known it for a while." Her words stung because they were true. I had spent so many years convincing myself he would always take my side. That love alone would anchor him. But Emma was clever, slippery. Love wasn't enough against someone like her. Susan reached into her gardening apron and handed me a tiny wooden cross. "Keep this with you," she said. "Not because it will save you from her, but because it will remind you you're not alone and you're stronger than you think." I clenched that little cross in my palm, feeling its edges bite into my skin, sharper than any prayer I'd ever whispered. And in that quiet garden, surrounded by roses and thorns alike, I vowed to hold my ground. When I got home from church that afternoon, I went straight to my small home office, a dusty little room I hadn't set foot in for months. The air smelled of old paper and cedar, the kind of scent that made me feel like Cliff was still close by, watching over my shoulder. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my old oak filing cabinet and dug out the heavy brown binder he and I had put together after his first stroke. I remember the day we assembled it. Cliff's hands shook as he signed each page, but his eyes were clear, determined. "Protect yourself, Maggie," he'd whispered. "People change when they smell money. Even family." I didn't believe him then. I thought love was stronger than greed, that family always returned to each other in the end. God, how naive I was. I flipped through the pages now, the sound of each plastic sleeve slicing the silence. Property deeds, insurance policies, bank statements, copies of my will. A note from Cliff in his neat, careful handwriting. "Never give up the originals. Keep copies safe." I traced my fingers over his writing, feeling a hot sting at the back of my eyes. But I didn't let the tears fall. Not today. I pulled out everything I thought I might need. The original trust documents, a list of my medication schedules, notes on my insurance beneficiaries. I made piles across the floor like a general planning for war, because that's what this was now, a quiet, invisible war. I also found the old safe key, taped to the back of Cliff's favorite fishing photo. Inside that safe, tucked behind my mother's pearl brooch, was a folder labeled simply Contingencies. It held copies of every major financial move I'd made since Cliff passed. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard, my joints screaming in protest. But beneath the pain, I felt something else humming, a sense of resolve I hadn't touched in years. Emma thought she was the only one who could plan in the dark, but she forgot. I was married to a man who taught me to think 5 moves ahead. I wasn't just gathering papers, I was gathering my power. A few days after Emma's breakdown in my kitchen, I invited her over under the pretense of discussing her upcoming anniversary party. She arrived trying to look composed, hair smoothed down, in a new floral dress I hadn't seen before. But I could see the cracks behind her eyes, the jitter in her fingers as she set her purse down. We sat in the sunroom, the soft afternoon light painting her face too honestly. She talked too much and too fast. Table settings, party favors, the signature cocktail she wanted to serve. I listened quietly, letting her words fill the room like cheap perfume. When she finally paused to sip her tea, I set my cup down and folded my hands in my lap. "You know," I said softly, "I keep thinking about that cake." Her shoulders jerked slightly. She tried to recover, forcing a bright, too wide smile. "Oh, what about it?" I leaned forward just enough that she had to meet my eyes. "The way you asked me that morning, like your life depended on whether I ate it." Her laugh cracked, brittle as old porcelain. "I told you it was just a silly misunderstanding. I didn't want you to share it, that's all." I held her gaze steady and unblinking. "It felt like more than that, almost like you were afraid something would go wrong if it ended up in someone else's hands." A fine tremor ran through her hands. She placed them in her lap, squeezing her fingers together until her knuckles turned pale. She tried to pivot back to party talk, but her voice faltered, tripping over the words. I sat back, letting the silence stretch between us like a tightrope. Watching her squirm felt like watching weeds wither under the hot sun. I didn't accuse her outright. Not yet. I didn't have Martha's test results in my hands. But in that moment, I knew I didn't need her confession. She had already told me everything in that first frozen stare. In every panicked breath, in every forced smile since, and as she fumbled for her purse to leave, I knew she was unraveling thread by trembling thread. Emma didn't stay long after that. She bolted from my sunroom in a storm of sobs and half-formed excuses, leaving the lemon scones untouched and her tea still steaming on the table. I sat there for a moment, staring at the drips on the lace cloth, feeling the emptiness echo around me like a hollow drum. Then I heard it, my phone buzzing angrily across the counter. It was my son. Before I could even say hello, his voice thundered through the line. "Mom, what the hell did you say to Emma? She just called me in tears. Says you accused her of terrible things. Are you losing your mind?" The words hit harder than I expected. Like a slap I should have seen coming. "David," I started softly, but he didn't let me speak. "She's been nothing but good to you. You've always been difficult, but this is insane. You need help. You're making up stories and turning on your family." My throat closed around his words. For a moment, I thought I might drop the phone. I pressed my free hand to my chest to steady the pounding. "David, listen to me." "No," he snapped. "You listen. If you keep this up, we're going to have to reconsider how safe it is for you to live alone. Maybe it's time to look at assisted living. You're clearly not thinking straight." I opened my mouth, but no sound came. I heard Emma's muffled voice in the background, sobbing, weaving her story like a spider spinning silk. He hung up before I could respond. I stood in the kitchen, the silence roaring louder than any argument we had ever had. I looked out the window at the rose bushes Cliff planted, petals now wilted and sagging in the summer heat. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to shatter every lie they had ever fed me. But I didn't. I just stood there, feeling the old familiar ache bloom in my bones. For years, I had told myself that love was enough to keep him tethered to me. that no matter how far he drifted, he would find his way back. But in that moment, with my phone screen still lit up in my trembling hand, I realized something devastatingly simple. He was already gone. That night, I sat in my bedroom with the rain tapping against the window like tiny fingers, each drop echoing the same question in my head. What if they're right? I stared at the soft glow of my bedside lamp, watching the shadows dance on the wall. My mind churned, replaying David's voice, sharp, disappointed, so sure of my unraveling. I could almost see him pacing his living room. Emma curled up on the couch, dabbing her eyes while she whispered poison into his ear. "You're losing your mind. You need help. You're making up stories." The words burrowed into my skin, into every soft place I'd ever protected. I thought about every time I forgot where I left my reading glasses, every time I stumbled over a word in a sentence, the tiny normal slips of age that now felt like loaded bullets aimed at me. I turned toward the dresser, my eyes landing on a photo of David as a boy, grinning wide, 2 front teeth missing, frosting smeared across his cheeks from his 5th birthday cake. A cake I had baked myself, standing on aching legs, humming while I stirred the batter, because I wanted it to be perfect for him. When did that boy disappear? When did his eyes turn away from me? His heart hardened into something I couldn't touch. I pressed my palm to my chest, trying to calm the thudding. I felt so alone in that moment. It almost knocked the breath out of me. Am I really losing it? I whispered into the room. The walls didn't answer. I wanted so badly to believe this was all some horrible misunderstanding, that Emma hadn't meant it, that David would come home tomorrow and hug me and say he was sorry. But deep down, beneath the doubt and the grief, there was a quiet knowing, a small, unwavering voice that refused to die out completely. Trust what you saw. Trust what you felt. I closed my eyes and let the rain lull me. Each drop a reminder that even in this dark, echoing doubt, I was still here, still breathing, and maybe, just maybe, not as alone as they wanted me to believe. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the phone ringing. My heart jumped before I even reached it, bracing for David's voice. Another volley of accusations. But it wasn't him. It was Martha. "Margaret," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I have the results." I held my breath so long it felt like the walls might collapse around me. "It's real," she continued. "The cake was laced with sedatives, heavy ones, the kind that could knock you out cold, especially at your age with your medications. You were right. You were always right." I didn't realize I was crying until a hot tear splashed onto my hand. My knees buckled, and I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. My fingers pressed so tight around the receiver. I thought it might crack. All the doubts that had clawed at me in the dark scattered like frightened mice. Every late-night whisper, every tight smile from Emma, every time David dismissed my worries as overreactions, all of it turned to ash. Martha kept talking, telling me she had copies of the lab report, that she'd come over immediately. But I barely heard her. I was somewhere else. Back in the kitchen, Emma's eyes wide and hollow as she realized her plan had slipped through her fingers. I could see her mask fall completely now, see the small, venomous creature behind those perfectly arranged curls and designer blouses. I sat there for what felt like hours, the receiver gone silent, my tears drying into tight tracks on my cheeks. Then slowly, something new began to move inside me. A heaviness lifting, replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. I had the truth now. Not just a suspicion, not just a gut feeling. I had proof, solid and undeniable. I looked at my reflection across the room, my face still wet and splotchy, my eyes rimmed in red. "You're stronger than she ever knew," I whispered to that tired old woman staring back. And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed it. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of a fight I intended to win. Martha arrived before noon, clutching a thick manila folder like it was a sacred text. She didn't knock. She just came straight in, eyes sharp and determined. She dropped the folder onto my kitchen table, the slap echoing through the room like a gunshot. "We have everything we need," she said, voice low. "It's time." I ran my fingers over the folder, feeling its weight. Inside the lab results, copies of my medical records, Martha's handwritten notes, photos of the cake slice, evidence undeniable and cold. I felt my heart pound, not with fear, but with something steadier, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Cliff and I fought to save the house all those years ago. "We call a family meeting," I said finally, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded. Martha nodded, her jaw tight. "I'll be here just in case." That afternoon, I called David. My voice was even, almost gentle. "I need you and Emma to come by. Bring the kids, too. We need to talk." They arrived just before dinner. Emma's eyes darted everywhere, but mine. David looked wary, like a man stepping into a room he already knew was on fire. The grandchildren clung to each other, sensing something was wrong, even if they didn't understand it. I led them into the living room where I had set up the documents on the coffee table. My will, trust updates, and copies of the evidence. A small pile of photographs of my grandchildren sat beside them, a reminder of what mattered most to me. I stood in front of the fireplace, my back straight. "I know about the cake," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I know everything." Emma's face collapsed, her mouth opening and closing without sound. David started to speak, but I raised a hand. "Save it. I have proof. Martha has it. The police can have it too if I choose." I picked up the final document, my updated will, and looked right at Emma. "From this moment forward, my inheritance will go directly to the grandchildren. Not a penny to you." My voice trembled only once when I looked at David. "I loved you more than anything, but you let this happen." The silence that followed was heavy, electric, and for the first time in that house, I felt taller than all of them. David's face turned a color I'd never seen before, somewhere between ash and crimson. He looked from me to Emma, then back at the papers spread across the table, as if trying to read them in a language he no longer understood. My grandchildren sat huddled on the sofa, eyes wide and wet, their small hands twisting together in nervous knots. The oldest, Lily, glanced at me with that same earnestness David used to have as a boy before the world taught him to look past me. Emma sank to her knees, her hands clawing at the hem of my skirt. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her mouth twisted into something grotesque and desperate. "Please, please, Margaret, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it was a mistake. I was scared." I stepped back, the fabric slipping from her grasp. "You were scared of losing control, not of losing me." David fell into a chair, his elbows on his knees, hands pressed to his forehead. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. I watched his shoulders shake, small, pitiful tremors. I almost reached for him, almost. But then I remembered his voice on the phone, cold and final. My heart cracked open again, but this time it wasn't grief that poured out. It was relief. I looked at my grandchildren and felt the ache deepen. They hadn't chosen any of this. They were just children, innocent, still soft. And that's why I made the choice I did, to protect them from the rot that had grown around them. Emma let out a keening wail that filled the room, bouncing off the walls like a wounded animal's cry. David didn't move to comfort her. He just sat there, frozen in the wreckage of the lie they'd built together. I turned toward the window, watching the last light slip below the trees in my yard. I thought I'd feel victorious, powerful. But all I felt was an aching emptiness, the shape of all the love I had given without return. Yet beneath that emptiness, a tiny seed of peace began to root. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one begging to be seen. I wasn't the one on my knees. I was standing and I was free. Emma lunged forward suddenly, her fingers scrambling for the stack of documents on the table, her face twisted with fury, spittle at the corner of her lips. "You're faking this," she screamed, her voice cracking like dry wood. "These are lies. You forged this. You're trying to ruin us." I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. Instead, I walked over to the small console by the TV and pulled out a thin black folder. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. Inside were stills and printed screenshots from my home security footage, the one Cliff and I had installed years ago when neighborhood break-ins were on the rise. I held up one image large enough for all of them to see. Emma in my kitchen, her head bent over the cake batter, a small bottle clutched in her hand. her face lit by the glow of the stove light, her concentration so intense she didn't even notice the small red camera blinking in the corner. David's eyes widened, his body recoiling as if he'd been struck. Emma's mouth fell open, her hands trembling at her sides. That's not, she whispered, but the words dissolved before they reached me. I moved slowly, deliberately, laying out the rest of the photos like tarot cards on the coffee table. Each one a silent confession. Each one cutting away the last of her lies. I called the police before you got here, I said calmly. They're waiting outside. Emma stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts. She looked at David, but he turned away, his face crumpling under the weight of what he saw, or maybe what he refused to see for too long. When the knock came at the door, Emma's legs gave out completely. The wail that escaped her mouth wasn't a sound I'd ever heard from another human before. 2 officers stepped inside, calm and certain. One gently took Emma by the arms, lifting her from the floor as she screamed, her hands grasping at nothing. David stood, staring at her, his face pale and empty. Then his eyes found mine, and for the first time in years, he didn't look through me. He saw me. All of me. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke loud enough for both of us. And as they let her out into the fading twilight, I felt my shoulders drop as if 100 invisible chains had finally fallen away. The front door slammed shut behind the officers, taking Emma's shrill cries with them. The sudden silence felt so deep it nearly swallowed the room whole. David stood in the center of the living room, arms limp at his sides. His face looked older somehow, hollow, sagging under the weight of the truth that had finally clawed its way into the light. He turned to me, his lips parting like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. For a moment, he just stared at me. Really stared the way he might have looked at me when he was a boy and scraped his knee, waiting for me to scoop him up and say it was going to be okay. Finally, his knees buckled, and he dropped into the armchair. His hands covered his face as a sob burst from deep in his chest, raw and broken. "Mom," he whispered, voice strangled. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have listened." I wanted to go to him, to wrap my arms around his shoulders, to stroke his hair like I did when nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. But I stayed rooted in place. Some part of me wanted to say it was okay, but it wasn't. And I wouldn't lie anymore. Not to him. Not to myself. Instead, I took a slow, steady breath. "I know," I said quietly. "But you didn't." He looked up at me then, eyes bloodshot, cheeks wet with tears. And in that moment, I saw my son again. Not the man shaped by Emma's manipulations, not the cold voice on the phone dismissing me as paranoid, but the frightened boy who once believed I was a safe place. "I'm sorry," he said again, smaller this time. I nodded, my heart tight, but strangely calm. "You'll have to make things right with the children," I said softly. "And with yourself?"
How?
How did I let it get this far? He dragged a hand through his hair, eyes searching mine like he might find absolution there. "I thought I was protecting them, the kids, you, everyone. But I was just blind." I let his words settle. Heavy as they were, my heart twisted, but I wouldn't soften the edges of this moment. "Not yet." "You trusted her," I said, my voice low, deliberate. "She was good at that, wasn't she? Making you feel like you were the one holding it all together." He flinched, a quick wounded thing, and dropped his gaze to the floor. "She made it sound like you were losing it, like you couldn't handle things anymore." His jaw tightened, and he shook his head. "I should have known better. I should have come to you." "You should have," I agreed, the words calm but unyielding. "But you didn't. And now here we are." I took a step closer, not to comfort, but to make him feel the weight of my presence. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" He looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected me to hand the burden back to him. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, his voice cracking. "The kids, they're so confused. They keep asking where she is, why she's gone, and I don't know what to tell them." "Tell them the truth," I said, softer now, though my words carried an edge. "Not all of it. Not yet. They're too young for the whole story, but enough so they know you're not hiding from them." They deserve that much. He nodded slow and uncertain, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. And you? He asked, almost a whisper. What do I do to make this right with you? I let the question hang, studying him, the man he'd become, the boy he'd been, the years of distance, of Emma's poison seeping into our family, flashed through me. But so did the memory of his small hand in mine, his laughter in the backyard, the way he'd once looked at me like I held all the answers. You start by being honest, I said finally. With me, with the kids, with yourself. No more excuses. No more letting someone else pull your strings. I paused, my throat tightening. And you don't ever let me feel like a stranger in my own family again. His eyes welled up, and he took a shaky step toward me. I won't, he said, voice raw. I swear, Mom, I won't. I held his gaze, searching for the truth in it. And maybe I saw it, or maybe I just wanted to. Either way, something in me softened just a fraction. Then prove it, I said quietly. Starting now. The room fell silent again, save for the faint hum of the world outside. I felt that fragile freedom stir again, stronger this time, but laced with something new. Hope maybe, or the ghost of it. But as I looked at him, I wondered if he could carry the weight of what came next.